Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. Round one done and in the can. And look, chances are by the time you're listening to this episode, round two is happening this very day, or you're already a game or two through. But regardless, we're here to chat you through not just some strategy stuff into round two, but to help navigate you through the next couple of weeks. Joining me on this episode, as you've heard him right throughout the pre-season, I've got Louis on. Hello, buddy. How are you, man?
Good, thanks, mate. It's really good to have had round one behind us and we can start talking some trade strategy. Lots to unpack from this first round of 42, as there always is after round one.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also on this episode, the 2020 DT champion, co-founder, and a genuinely good human being. I've got Rids. Hello, buddy.
Hey, mate, how are you? Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button.
You're going, that's not me. That's not me at all. No, it is. All right, lads, there is a lot we got to get to. I want to get to some Patreon questions. We've had some great questions that we absolutely want to make sure we answer for them. If you would love to get your questions on the podcast, you can become a Patreon. All the details for that are at coachespanel.tv. A massive shout out to Julie Evans, who's just jumped in the past couple of days as a premium tier Patreon. We appreciate your support, Julie, and hope you have a fantastic 2022 season. So we want to get to some of those questions. I want to talk about corrective trades. I want to talk about cash cows. We want to look at stuff across the formats. But let's start right at maybe what should be one of the most intriguing parts of the conversations. And that is, man, did we have some great scores on the weekend and probably some unicorn scores that we're never going to get. It's dangerous, I know, Louis and Rids, to say that teams should have a specific priority because there's different variables, teams, all that stuff. But Louis, from your perspective, what should be coaches' number one priority this week, regardless of the format they play? What should they be looking for with their teams and the trades that they may or may not need to make?
Oh, well, as we know, mate, cash generation is a massive thing in all the formats. And you've got the best opportunity to get it right after round one. So you can make your fix-up trades. Maybe you missed a Nick Martin, or maybe you picked a Mitch Owens, which I did in my case. After round one, you should be relatively happy with your team. We might go into some of the mid prices and premiums a little bit later in this podcast, but after round one, you've decided this is the team I'm going in with. They've played their one game, and now you've got a little bit of data to just have a look at those rookies and which ones look like they're going to be capable of scoring, which ones are going to have some good job security, and which ones are actually going to generate that cash so that you can downgrade them later on in the season to get up to the premiums that you want to choose later on. So for me, the number one rule is really just identifying which cash cows I need to get, which ones I missed, and making sure that I can get them in my team as soon as possible, because I know that's going to be the ticket to upgrade my team as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's good. And especially in AFL fantasy this week, where we've already seen the prices begin to start moving. Like, I think someone like a Nick Martin's already gone up around that 70, 80K. And even just a couple of 40s over the next few weeks, he's still going to generate $100,000 to $200,000. So yeah, these cows that if you've missed them in that format, gee whiz, you might want to make those corrective moves this week to be able to get them. But I suppose, Rids, and I'm keen on your AFL fantasy take in a second, but in Dream Team and Supercoach, where it's a 3-week price cycle change, so the urgency to jump on a cow after a breakout round, like a Martin, like a Hayes, like a Rochelle, what should the trading priority be for teams this week that don't have a significant injury like a Christian Sailor?
So, MJ, the biggest problem this year is we've got an unknown factor called COVID. Okay, yeah. And health, what are they calling it these days?
Health and safety protocols, yes.
Rightio. So
an
health
American
and safety,
term.
well, they don't care about health and safety protocols when they enter the field, but they do any other time of the week. So, but let me not go there, okay? So we got this massive unknown. Often I encourage people to sit on their fix-it trades until week 2 in Supercoach and Dream Team.
Yep.
I actually think that variable this year, and it's very, very unknown, and it's going to be hard to predict. It means that maybe we're going to have to go a little bit earlier, and we might need to jump on before the bubble, if that makes sense, mate, because we don't know what next week's going to happen. Yeah. This time last week, okay, what are we now? It's Wednesday, isn't it?
Wednesday,
so tomorrow,
we're recording this.
Tomorrow, last week, we were sitting there watching someone like an Adam Chara going, what a great pick. What an awesome pick. Well done. Only a week later, less than a week later, we're actually going, guess who's out with the protocols now?
Yeah.
So
Jake Lloyd in a similar circumstance where he was in starting squads and then he wasn't, albeit in a 24-hour window.
And this means, though, that we may need to just be a little bit more proactive with trading. And we're just going to have to suck it up if we get any bad luck after that trade. But because at any stage, we don't know what's going to happen next week now. We don't even, like Michael Voss was already testing positive the morning after that game last week.
Yeah.
It's just such an unknown to this. So there's no right, there's no wrong. No one knows how this is going to work. Just be ready to be able to fix things up if you need to, okay?
Would you use one of your, and Louis, I'm keen to get your thoughts on the people we should be targeting in that cash cow range in AFL fantasy in a second, but Rids, is it worth using one of our trade boosts or being prepared to use one of our trade boosts in Dream Team and Supercoach where we get a handful of them a year where we can move one additional trade of our 35 trades in to make it? Is that a strategic play or would you want it for later?
I reckon there's been a million conversations around trade boost in the last week or so, okay, on all the many, many different pods and everything else. The real thing about the trade boost is early in the season, you've already got pretty much the majority of your bench playing, okay, because that's how you've done it with the starting lineup. Now, if you traded in a red dot through the week and they don't get named, then that's going to be a little bit more complicated, but not unmanageable. So my problem would be is I want to use a trade boost when I really, really need to, or when I can actually make more cash and upgrade to a premium quicker than other teams. They're the two scenarios. I don't want to use it if I've got someone playing on the bench that's going to give me 30, 40, 50 as a rookie price. Because again, as I keep saying, MJ, that's all we should be expecting from the majority of our rookies.
Yeah. No, I think that's really fair. So let's come back to those rookies. And again, Louis, the prices have already moved for us and we've listed the break-evens of the players 20 right through and under right through to the negatives in AFL fantasy, but in maybe in a priority order, but in a handful, who are the guys that if you don't have them, this is the week and this is the corrective trade you go and get, regardless of, maybe how you get there. Who are these cows that for AFL fantasy coaches, they've just got to go after?
Well, MJ, there's probably 4 that coaches really, really need. And I'm assuming most would have started with Nick Dacos. And for me, he would be priority 1 just because with him potentially, and I would say we're definitely adding defensive status. He's a shoe-in to, not a shoe-in, I won't call it that, but he's a good chance to be sitting in your defensive line after the buys with his scoring and what he can potentially do. So Nick Dacos has got to be number 1. I think you got to jump on Nick Martin too ASAP. He comes in with the minus 44 break even. So if he pops just a modest 60, he's going to go up 60, 70, 80K. And he's probably going to be one of those first guys that we can take off that bubble, certainly in AFL fantasy, and trade down to another rookie and actually get up on the other end for a premium. So he's going to be your ticket to it as soon as possible. After that, you've got Jack Hayes, who was seriously impressive. I think he bought himself some job security on the weekend too. I know Ryder's playing BFL, I think this weekend, but gee, he's a chance to even keep Ryder out of the side for a couple of weeks, maybe until he does have a bit of a poor game. And then 4th is Josh Rochelle from the Crows, your Crows, MJ. He was seriously impressive. He's not going to kick 5 every single week, but he's kicked off his scoring with a -7 break even, and he should be someone who's going to generate a little bit of cash over the next couple of weeks for us. And as you'll notice, all 4 of those guys, they do have that job security where you can rely on them for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks or however long you choose. And MJ, I just wanted to piggyback on the back of that COVID chat as well.
Yeah.
As we pick up red dots over the next couple of weeks, obviously looping in all the formats is something that a lot of coaches do. But with those COVID outs or the health and safety protocols, do you now question whether or not it's wise to actually use your loop? Because potentially you're going to be using a loop in a line where you actually have a laid out on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you're not going to have anything to be able to fall back on.
I'm actually still quite really comfortable with it. I think it all depends on the format. But the key thing for me is the strategic component of the coach. How risk averse are they? How intuitively are they in terms of who is that red dot that they traded into? For example, if they traded into a Sam Skinner because they wanted some versatility of DPP, similarly with an Elijah Hollins, I think it's going to be sooner rather than later that we see, Skinner should be as early as this week with Alir being out. I think he's more than likely to get named from a Port Adelaide perspective. So for me, the red dot, I actually think in AFL fantasy, we're the most unfamiliar or uncomfortable with using it. But with that utility position, you should be able to still be really, really aggressive in there. And there will be weeks that they come even in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks time where your cow hasn't quite fattened up, where your mid-price guys still got a little bit of movement to go. And there will still be time in the next couple of weeks that if you do need to do a correctional red dot removal, you're going to have time to do that. So, yep, it could be really bad in time. But for me, I think if you're smart and keeping an eye on that loophole strategy, it helps. Like imagine if you could do what you did last week with Hayes, Martin, and you get Rochelle. I think it opens up some great opportunities. But what's your take on that, Reeds, on red dot strategy?
So there's a couple of interesting things on that, okay? So generally the rookies come, like the rookies with the best job security come from the lower teams from the year before.
Yep.
And generally the way the draw works is they get the later games in the, like each later, they get the later games of the round, each round, if that makes sense. So
no prime
if you think
positioning.
about a Hawthorn, if you think about
North Adelaide,
Melbourne,
Gold Coast, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yep.
St Kilda, yeah.
Yeah. So you're always going to have that option to be able to get someone on at any stage because of the rolling lockout across all 3 formats now.
Yeah.
So this is why I was sort of, and you know this, MJ, I've been saying this for years, and I sort of understand the 30 green dot,
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad strategy at all. Yeah.
Well, it's definitely is fine. But I mean, we were sort of suggesting, like, I know I was making a comment last week saying, well, if you start with Gawn, you lock everyone out in the rucks and you don't even get to see what Hayes scores because, and that's why I was saying to people like Bruce might be actually an option, even though he's been suspended for round 1.
Yep.
And this isn't going to happen every week. Okay?
No,
obviously.
of course not.
But, Hayes is 26. We know that he's got a lot of history and he's got a lot of decent scoring history
in the sample.
The sample. Geez, I'm struggling with words.
You're doing well, mate. You're doing well.
Yeah, so, I mean, we know this kid can play. He wasn't going to get a spot and just not do anything. So, I mean, that was always a viable option. Now, if people can sleep better at night having the centre forgets and just didn't want to go
the 30 dots and fine.
Guess what?
Yeah.
MJ, he's got DPP, so he can still be a rookie for
that's right.
emergency, can he not?
Yeah.
So you could still do that as a rookie. And then you could still do that with Nick Martin. I mean, and this is why Supercoach and Dream Team, okay, we've always had that ability and we've been able to trade into red dots to get that bench because at the end of the day, with the rolling lockout, we're more experienced. AF, it's sort of, the cash generation happens from the first game and so on and so forth. And often, if you do have someone that flies, like let's just say Nick Martin,
let's use him.
80,000 growth already.
It's a lot of money.
Now what's happening is if you haven't started him in your squad of 30, you're actually trading into a guy that others have already got 80,000 coin banked on.
Correct.
Banked potentially 130 points.
On field, yeah.
And the biggest thing that people forget is, but they've got to do it, okay? There's no choice. You have to do it. You have to bring him in. That's a no-brainer.
Yes.
But the problem with this is the people that own him already have that trade to utilize to actually make more money or
somewhere
more
else.
points.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And they might have Louis and I were only talking about it the other day. They might decide that they want to restructure their whole team. Well, you can have that ability if you started these guys and you don't actually have any issues with rookie. You can decide, I don't feel comfortable with 3 midfield premiums. I want 4. Well, you can actually restructure it now, and you've got the choice to do so. So, and this is where the strategy comes in, yeah. But DT players and Supercoach players have had that experience on doing that. Whereas I think AF is only starting to get to that maturity level now, especially with the rolling lockout that's only been in for the 12
Well,
months.
that's the ingredient, isn't it? The AFL fantasy coaches and the past 2 years with it being COVID affected in terms of the way and where and how the game's played. It is a new strategy, the same way it is for coaches that 7 or 8 years ago moved into AFL fantasy from a dream team or super coach. It takes a little while to pick up the moving price cycles every week strategy to know the type of players you should or shouldn't be targeting and when to make the move. I think the converse is now that the rolling lockouts are here to stay in AFL fantasy. It's how do I maximize every 30 position, not just for cash components, but also for the scoring and versatility components.
So I just want to highlight 2 little things here as well. DPP, I know everyone says value's king, whatever. DPP's king, okay? Flexibility's king.
Versatility is
in
king.
this instance. But what you've got to do now is you've actually got to start paying attention to where the matches fall within the round and work out the best plan of attack. Because we're going to have red dots continually on every line as we move forward. You can only see DeConnin right now. Every single person right now should have a red dot in their defensive lines because of Sam DeConnin. Like he was one of the highest picked defensive rooks because he was the only defensive rook at rookie price. So you see what I mean? So a large percentage of people should have a red dot right now in the defensive line. Now, years ago, we would have gone, you know what, we still want to maintain and generate some cash with that red dot. But the fact is, you can actually use that strategically and actually see if you can bank a few points by using a loophole option with it.
Yeah. What about you? What's your take on that, Louis? I know we could spend a lot of time on red dot strategy, but that's certainly, you've come from more of an AFL fantasy as being the primary function and format you've played, and you're growing and exploring more in the others. How have you found that kind of that internal wrestle for yourself and coaches that are AFL fantasy coaches and are processing through this exploration of red dot strategy?
Yeah, it's certainly a moving strategy year to year, and COVID certainly amplified that a little bit. I think somebody like a Sam DeConning, every coach knows how to use the VC, the captain loop. That's fine.
Correct.
But Sam DeConning could actually be a little bit of a blessing for us because he comes with that defensive forward status. And what we know is rookies is rookie roulette week to week, certainly early on in the season. So with that defensive forward status, the opportunity he actually gives us is that we can now loop him to loop the best rookies on field. And you saw in round one, that might mean getting a Nick Martin who scored 130 versus a Tristan Cherry who got about 61 points. So you're improving your side by 70 points. And maybe on the flip side, you've also stuck the VC on a Christian Petrarca on the Wednesday night. You've doubled you've doubled 140 points. So 280 points instead of taking your fallback option, which might have been a
Tom Mitchell type, who went
Tom
80,
Mitchell,
90
Josh Kelly, Jack Steele. A lot of the guys actually did fail to fire in round one, and that's what we see in the early rounds. So I think that red dot strategy has opened up new opportunities for coaches. It's just about being aware of the fixture, like Rid said, and being aware of the risks that come with that. So last year, think it was round 19, I was looping in my defensive line.
Mhm.
I had might have been is it Briggs? He had the defensive status last year.
Kieran Briggs from
Briggs,
GWS.
Yep. Looped,
Yeah, he definitely did.
looped him. I think I copped a laid out with COVID. It might have been like a Callum Mills, Toby Green type thing.
Sure.
Couldn't do anything about it, and I copped a donut because of it. So coaches just need to be aware of that rolling fixture
of course,
and how to navigate it.
Again, every coach plays with a different set of strategy, different ways of watching through the weekend. Some are like they don't get a chance to be near their phones and know what's going on. And so different strategies only work for certain coaches based on how risk averse they are, how available and flexible they are to be able to get to the app they need to be able to make the moves. So there's all of those variables. I think you're both right. You did bring up this interesting point, and I'm keen to get both of your guys' takes on this. There were some underperforming premiums. I think, to be fair, they got balanced out in our scoring with just how good our cows were. I would be shocked if Rochelle, Hayes, or Martin performed to that level again this year.
So MJ, I just want to say something here. So I was listening to something earlier today. It might have been on Selby's pod. Yeah, so they were saying, okay, Nick Martin before round 1, his best disposal count was 24
in the waffle,
and he had only kicked 1 goal or best.
Never more than 4 in a waffle before.
Yeah, but he rocks up to the AFL and he has 27 and kicks 5.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So if anyone out there is expecting that to happen every week, you check yourself, rightio.
Yeah, no, our cows
He's still a rookie.
Yeah, our cow expectation is, hey, if you go over 50, now maybe it can be a little bit higher with some of these other top end guys like a Horn Francis, not a Horn Francis, you could, but Dacos, who's got a real cushy role and just a fantasy beast for years. Anytime they go over 60, it's just gravy and money. But I think they did balance out the poor Crisp, the poor Whitfield, the poor Short. Probably got
all in the defensive line, mate.
and that really was even though some of the mids that Louis mentioned, it didn't have great games. The backs were really where we were hurting outside of in Supercoach, where a couple of our premiums did all right. Some stepping stone sort of guys like a Hewitt and a Sicily were more than all right. And then a Dan Houston, who's been the forever tease premium, had an absolute blinder. We had these 3 or 4 really interesting names that didn't do well. I know the initial conversation, Rids, is keep the faith and back in your premiums. And I'm keen to explore that strategy in a second. But Rids, talk to me through these 3 guys, and every team is unique and has different objectives and different elements. So for coaches that might be in a position to look at these underperforming premiums, and they're in a format where they can really explore that, what is the process coaches should be doing from a strategic perspective?
Okay, MJ, I say this week in, week out, okay? Watch the games.
Yes.
Yeah? I preach it. Just watch the games. The reason why I'm encouraging people to watch the games is you can get an eye test for whoever. It doesn't matter what performance, doesn't matter where they play. You actually see it with your own eyes. Is there a game of style? Is there a game plan change? Is there something that's actually totally different that just didn't feel right?
Sure.
But okay, so I'm going to go off a little bit of a rant here.
All right, buckle up, Louis. Here we go.
So the problem I got with this is you can't just make a blanket comment that it's one fits everything. I know old time DT and old time AF and everything else. It's back to premiums, back to premiums, back to premiums. But there's only one winner every year, is there not? So, I mean, no matter what your goal is in life should depend in that game, should depend on what you do. Now, if you're playing that game for a league perspective and not overall, why should they trust the premiums? Yeah. They don't need to. There's not blind faith. You're not married to this person. You've just selected them in your team. Like, you don't get a 5-year commitment and then you just go, oh, look, it's not like that. Yeah.
It's not a keeper
real.
league. No.
No, it's, so you have to play for what your agenda is for the game and for your enjoyment. If you sat there and you watched a player and it made you want to spew for the whole game and you just did not enjoy that game, trade them. It's a game. You want to enjoy it. Own the players you want to enjoy, yeah? And the other thing that I'm not seeing on that is by people saying just back who you started, okay, that's fine. And 99% of times that's correct, yeah? But what about that one where it isn't? And you're sitting there and you're telling someone who has absolutely destroyed their season because they haven't backed their gut and backed their eye and traded that person out, that kills a season. And we've all been on that, haven't we?
Yep.
We've all had that premium that's gone 30 points, 40 points under what we thought they were going to have. We just hope that it's not unique.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that really destroys your season. But often it is. So, I mean, just back yourself in. I say this all the time. Like, before round one, and we hear it in AFL fantasy all the time, value is king, yeah?
Yes.
We hear it all the time. Oh, you don't go top dollar, you don't do this, you don't do that. But then suddenly after round one, it's like, no, you stick to the gun, you stick to the premiums, you don't. Guess what? There might have been a value option that came in round one that you went, oh, I really like the look of that. Let's say Lipinski. Lipinski was in the middle. He was doing this, he was doing that. Matt Rao. I know a few people, that's just a mistake.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes the only option in your team is to trade a premium to this midfielder, this stepping stone potential or breakout premium, however you want to think, and have a go both ways. Like, if I said to you, MJ, after watching that game on the weekend, that Matt Rell averaged 105, would you be absolutely, especially in Supercoach, would you be surprised? I wouldn't be if he stayed on the park.
If Matt Rell stays on the park, he's absolutely going to push well past that 100 marker in AFL fantasy. And
isn't that
maybe
value?
110.
Isn't that value for the output?
I think so.
So why has one game changed the thought process of value is king?
Because
you started with someone, just fix it.
Yeah.
And it's a game. It's a trading game, yeah? It's not a starting game. It's not a starting squad game.
No,
and that's the thing that drives my head, right? You can go and have a look, okay, at all the past winners. They've all started. They've always had an awful round one or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not a starting squad game. It's a trading game. The reason why they get themselves back in is because other people are poorly trading, or you have traded, or they have traded so much better that they've caught up in a matter of minutes and they've gone past all the others.
Yep.
It's one or the other, or bad luck. Often it's bad luck, You think about how many times we start, mate, in round one and we get a guy, let's just say someone comes out and does 120. I'm just trying to remember. A couple of years ago, I remember Brad Ebert. He came out and went, do you remember that year? 120, 120, 110. And then he got injured round 4 or whatever it was. And that's not a bad selection. That's just bad luck.
Yeah, well, Adam Chera owners are experiencing bad luck.
Right now.
Bailey Smith owners are experiencing bad luck. I think value is always important, as is points on field. I would not be opposed to somebody that doesn't have right now a Matt Rowell. Now, again, this is on the premise that they've got those cows that Louis talked about earlier. Those are the most important things to correct with. And, using a Nick Martin as an illustration. In AFL fantasy, I don't have him. Both you boys do. And so you've got an additional trade to be explorative that I don't. So I've got to correct that while you guys have this opportunity to make another move. And based on statistics, a lot of coaches are in you've got to make that corrective trade. But someone might be in a position. So go.
How many times? And value is so important and it's understated, okay?
Yeah.
But it's overstated when it comes to your starting squad.
Yeah.
What people have missed is there's often guys that change their role. Look at Luke McDonald only 2 years ago. He changed his role mid-season. Look at Aaron Hall last year. Had a role change. He missed round 1. I think he started a sub in round 2 from
a couple
memory.
of weeks in, yeah.
And then he had a role change where he went to the back line and he was the number 1 defender for the year pretty much. There are opportunities here. Now, I'm going back. There's a lot of people that may not even remember who this guy is, but Mitch Clark up in Brisbane when Brisbane.
Louis was 5. Don't
Clark,
do that.
Keating, and a few others got injured. The number 1 rucks up there at the time. I think Charman was there.
Yeah.
Mitch Clark then became the number 1 ruck halfway through the year, and he went on a 100 average tear for the remainder of that year.
That's right.
Like this happens year after year. So it's okay to be fooled by preseason games at times. We often don't have enough data to make that outcome decision based off just one game. But if you watch the game and you use your eyes and you trust your gut, at least you won't have regrets, if you are making the wrong trade.
It's true. I suppose, Louis, a potential example of that, and keen on your thoughts on this, mate, would be say you're a Jaden Short owner and a Caleb Sarong owner. Both you're anticipating for whatever reasons to still be good. You've got all the right cows, but you didn't have Hewitt and you don't have Rao. That's the kind of approach where you can be moving to and making some of these trades, isn't it?
It is, and that's where you figure out whether or not these players can score in line and acknowledge that these guys are actually going to generate you cash over the next couple of weeks too. So if that does go wrong, if they get injured, if their scoring regresses, at least well, hang on, I might be able to jump off this guy. And let's say Jaden Short or a Caleb Sarong, they're popping now. They're going 100 every single week. They're likely at a lower price at that stage, or they're at a comparable price where you can actually go up to them just because you've used this guy as a stepping stone, and you're just as well off in terms of points because you jumped off them when they were scoring poorly and you've jumped on when they're going well. So I think sideways trading does cop a bit of a bad rep. And that's probably because later on in the season, it's not what you want to be doing unless you've got that completed side. But in round 1, it is the perfect opportunity to do so.
Correct.
So let's look at the forward line, for example. I don't think anybody expected Nick Martin, Jack Hayes, Josh Rochelle, even throw Tristan Cherry in there to score like they did.
Yep.
And you might have started one rookie on field in the forward line. Some people didn't start a single rookie on field in the forward line.
Sure.
But maybe you got all your rookies right. Your mid prices are looking okay. You like your premiums, but you're going, oh, how can I get a Nick Martin? How can I get a Jack Hayes? How can I get a Josh Rochelle onto my field? Oh, well, I've got Jaden Short sitting there. Let's trade in. Let's go Sam Skinner. Let's chuck him on the bench, and then let's move into the utility position and choose somebody that can actually score in line with a Jaden Short or outperform while being able to get a rookie on field that you actually want. So I realize that's two different lines, but that's just my line of thinking where I'm going, all right, Jaden Short scored, I think it was a 68, so average score. I'm sure he will bounce back.
Yeah, he turned up in Supercoach.
Actually turn him into someone who's going to score 5-10 points more. So let's look at a Lockie Neal isn't too much of a jump up from that. He's going to go, what, 105, 110?
Yeah.
Jaden Short, 95, maybe get up to 100. You're still getting the points on your field while adjusting your structure and actually setting yourself up for later on in the season. So, and I know I gave a little bit of different advice on the pod on Monday, but often it does take a couple of days to digest what's happening and how to actually use your team to its advantage. So I think round 1, if you're ever going to do it, it's the time to do it.
But I think so. Having said that, so Louis, don't forget, Monday's the perfect time where everyone should be in there and hitting that reverse trade, exploring every opportunity, every option.
Correct.
And then letting it settle for a day or two.
Yeah.
And then coming up with what suits them and their team, because every team is unique.
Yes.
We can't be making advice that's a blanket throw over the top of every team, because the reality is not every team's same, because every team is unique.
Mm-hmm. Both in players,
often-
makeup, strategy, focus.
So
all that
this
stuff.
is what we should be encouraging people to do, is what Louis just mentioned a minute ago. He went in, he tried a few things, he had the initial thought process, and then guess what? It's okay to change your mind, after you've played and you've gone, you know what? This works better for my team than this way. There's just not one rule that fits everyone. That's all. And I just want people to explore that, okay? So, but again, it's up to everyone else. But you've got to back your own gut. You don't want to have regrets. But MJ, it's just as important to watch guys that you don't own as it is that you do own. And this is something that people forget, So if you're sitting in that North Melbourne game last week and you're going, oh my God, Aaron Hall, wowee, and you're feeling actually sick to the point that you don't own him, and you knew that you were going to if he just got through that first hamstring injury.
That's right.
That would make you so sick that he just becomes must-have, Or maybe you weren't sure on a Sicily, or maybe you weren't sure with Lipinski with that injury.
Correct.
Guess what? If you were going to start them before that injury, and that was your intention, and you spent 90% of preseason, because they missed one preseason game, so you ended up going, I'm going to bring in Tuke because he's the safest option, often the most money, like the highest paid, like the price, isn't the safest option. The safest option is often the mid-pricer because it's all relative, like it's points per dollar output. So someone like Lipinski or Crouch or whoever it was, Caldwell. Let's look at Caldwell. Perfect, Yeah. Caldwell look at what he did after Langford went off injured. Maybe people were watching and went, oh my God, his minutes on the midfield went through the roof. His CBAs went through the roof. Langford's out for the next 10 weeks, unfortunately for him. But guess what? That opens an opportunity for potentially a Caldwell to come in and become that 9,500 guy that we really want. And just because you traded this guy in doesn't mean you have to keep him for the year.
Yeah.
Maybe when Langford comes back, you go, you know what? I've generated enough points. I've generated enough cash. And that's a direct, and sometimes, you know this yourself, MJ, look at Tex last year,
Yep.
At no stage did Tex feature in anyone's pre-round one team.
No.
But who was the best stepping stone in the first 6 rounds of last year? It was Tex Walker. You can't predict these things at times.
It's all about getting more information. And with more information, it helps you inform different structures and strategies. I think all of those ingredients and elements help make you great coaches. And the good thing is, if you make a mistake, that's okay. In life, it's a game. You just fix it. It's fine. If you're a Nick Martin non-owner by Sunday night last week, that's okay. Make the corrective trade and move on. If you go and had a couple of bad weeks with these premium defenders and a Jake Lloyd, not named on Thursday last week, ruined your plans, like, traded into Short, and I really did, or a Crispin, I really didn't want him. Well, that's okay. There's no reason not to make those adjustment trades. It's absolutely okay to do that. I'm keen, before we do hit some of our Patreon questions, lads, just to come back to some of those defenders a little bit, because you're right, Aaron Hall, if he's fit, he's clear and supreme. The number one defender in my eyes. But there are a couple of guys that just didn't have great, maybe not roles, but didn't have great scores and have players questioning them. So I'm keen to get both of your boys' takes on each of these players. I want to walk you through maybe 3 or 4 defender premiums that were relatively popular and whether or not a coach should consider moving them on. Again, the premise is, the variable is cows and who they do or don't have. But let's assume they're corrected with all the right cows. Could a coach or should a coach consider them? Let me go with the first one. Jack Crisp. Louis, to you first. Is there a world where you'd be comfortable to move him on, or is it back him in and wait a week?
Look, there's always a world where you can, MJ. If you think you can find someone who can outscore him, or if you think you can find someone you can go down to that can score in line and use that extra cash to bolster up another line or another player and get some extra points on field, then that's always viable. But
Sure.
it's important to remember, especially with round one, that scores are always going to be volatile. And that's for a lot of different reasons. Clubs come out in a lot of different ways. Some are just chomping at the bit to play footy. Others are a little bit lackluster, laxy-daisy. They give up points. Some players just are slow to start and they kick on in round two. I think we saw that from Jack Steele and Took Miller last year, where they went under 80 and then went on to go 120 for
Just
the season. So
there.
as an umbrella to what we've all spoken about for this podcast, it is important to use information that you see and go from there. So there's nothing wrong with backing them in after week one and seeing how they go in week two. There's every chance, and we've seen it before, Jack Chris can pop a 140. All of a sudden, that average comes up to a 95, which is about what you've paid for him anyway. So
problem solved.
It's about not being too reactionary as well. And as you always like to say, MJ, it's building that narrative as to why you think a player is performing that way. Sometimes it's an anomaly. Sometimes it's the beginning of a trend. That's what makes round one trading so difficult.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, it can be so painful as well, because let's say you did trade Jack Crisp and he does pop that 140 and you went down to
you're just embedding in that bad score, aren't you?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and you're locking in that loss of cash too. So I'm not going to advise a coach to go either which way. It's just about identifying whether or not that's going to help your side.
No, it's good. Sorry, Rids, I think I was cutting you off there. Is Jaden Short in a similar...
Nah, forget Jaden Short. Let's go back to Jack Crisp.
Okay, of course we are.
And we don't need it to be Jack Crisp. This goes across all of them, okay? Any player across your team. Don't forget, if you trade them out this week, you're living with them scoring that poor score in round one anyways, okay? So if you still believe, and we've got enough data over the last few years, okay, with Jack Crisp, for instance, and I'll make it Jack Crisp. If you still think he's going to average 100 for the season across the next 21 games, just do a little bit of maths. You know he's going to have to average more than 100 every game to have a season average of 100, because right now he's sitting on 51.
Yeah.
So if that's your firm belief, you have to stick with him, because you're actually getting value right now.
Yeah.
Forget the money that you've lost. Forget everything else. I know the break-even game happens and everyone gets focused on break-evens, but don't forget, it's the team that scores the most points that wins, okay? You can't go and say to the bank, oh, well, give me back that 25 grand that Jack lost last week on me because I want to go and invest it on Aaron Hall. That doesn't work like that, yeah?
No.
But, again, you got to try and work through this, yeah? So Jaden Short, for instance, okay? Let's go back to Jaden Short. And what I'll do is I'll just give an example of what I noticed with Jaden Short.
Yeah.
I look at that Richmond team and I don't see any small defender that plays a lockdown role on any of the small forwards for the opposition.
No.
Now, I only watch this on TV, so a lot of this is assumptions as well.
Yeah, not at the game, and so the nuances you miss, I get.
But during the season, and we've had enough viewage of this, we've seen Jaden Short run into open space, try and grab the ball. He demands the ball to go to him, and then he actually distributes it. We've seen the team actually use him and look for him many, many, many occasions. We didn't see that at all last week.
No.
So at points, we didn't even see him running into space. There was no chips. There was Richmond's style was they gave it to Rioli and they just moved the ball quickly. Okay. They ran it.
Surge. Yeah.
Now, that sort of fitted into the Jaden Short narrative from years gone by. That's how he's played and that's how he's prospered and he's done really well. And that's why he's a real premium defender option. And he's going to be good. There's going to be a point in time this year that we're going to say, oh, Jaden Short, you know, he's going well. But you think about it, and Louis, you were the first one to highlight this a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was on the pod as well. Like, Now, we know that Curnow didn't play for Carlton on the weekend or last week,
Mm.
but it's an awful matchup, isn't it? Like Curnow's
Yeah.
potentially a lockdown forward on the most attacking defender. And what do you think's going to happen this week with GWS if Short gets off the chain in the first quarter? I reckon Matt the Ball gets sent to
Of
him pretty
course.
much straight away. And we saw a little bit of that last week with the Sydney game when Blakey got off the chain a little bit.
Yeah, he played much more
Yeah.
accountable on him.
So I would be saying to people with Jaden Short specifically, watch the team. If a Mansell or a Stack or someone who can play that lockdown small like defender role on the best small forward, then you're probably
Feeling
okay,
safer
you
about
know?
that.
Yeah, you're feeling a bit more better. But often we look and we're trying to jump at shadows and we're trying to give ourselves a bit of confidence to go one way or the other. But I wouldn't be talking anyone out of keeping him. I wouldn't be talking anyone out of trading them because it's an individual decision and it's all based on what your team is and the most urgent need in your team.
No.
And Louis is 100% correct with what he just said, you know. And I mean, I don't often go into my thoughts for the week's trades or anything
Sure.
like that because I don't think this discussion's about me ever. But
No,
say
it's
with
about the
AFL
listener.
Fantasy, okay, I've pretty much nailed the rookies. So
Great.
I'm actually exploring maybe a Jack Crisp down to a mid-price option.
Sure.
So I can actually get, say, an Owens up to a Lipinski type.
Perfect.
You know, so I'm actually removing a problem rookie that's not generating cash and going to small points on field. Now, they're the options that I could have. Of course, I can go rookie to rookie. That's always there as your
Of
default
course.
if you need to. If you're not sure on a combination, you can always go back to the default, yeah?
Yep.
And look, we're going to have rookies this week, mate. We're already seeing the possibility of Josh Sim. We're seeing the possibilities of Skinner. You know, there's going to be others. Hollands, we don't know where he's at right
Yeah, he'd
now.
be close.
But at some stage, he's going to get a game, yeah?
Yeah. Bruce in Supercoach and DT is
What
certainly
about,
closer there.
We know that there's a couple of Geelong boys around that price,
Yeah, Cooper
you know?
Stevens isn't far off. Yeah.
But this is why I keep saying to people, just explore. Do what feels comfortable, you know? But there's not one rule for everyone.
No, I think, you know, you've both been excellent on this episode of really driving the strategy and the logic and the thought process for people through to help inform them to make decisions. Here at the Coaches Panel for as many years as we've been doing this, it's never been about you should do A, you should not do B. It's always been explaining the thought process, and hopefully that empowers you to make the most informed decision for you.
There's another part of this as well, MJ.
Yes, please.
Now,
and then we've got Patreon.
It's only a week ago. Go back a week. Why did you select player A in your team? How long have they spent in your team? Was it for the whole preseason? Because generally they're the guys that you want to back in. Okay.
Yep.
If they've
the Whitfield types.
Preseason, you don't want to trade them for a week. If you were comfortable with Aaron Hall from day one, you stick with him. If you were comfortable with Jack Crisp from day one, you stick with him. Because that's the way that you've structured it. And if you've had 3-4 months of playing with teams and structures and everything else, and he hasn't left your team, then back him in. Like, it doesn't matter who it is. And it doesn't matter what Joe blogs down the road or some fool on Twitter tells you. Just back him in. That's your team. You're the coach. It's your decision. Just empower yourself to be as best as you can and to use sound logic and to actually back yourself in, yeah?
Yeah, no, I really, really like that. Some good advice for you lads along the way. Let's jump into a couple of our Patreon questions. For those Patreons that have asked them, a lot of your questions, we've tried to answer them through the way we've built the structure of this podcast, but there are a couple more player or specific ones. And Louis, we'll go to you with this one because it is AFL fantasy related. It's from Brendan Wright. He says, in AFL fantasy, would you hold Justin McInerney or would you consider moving him on to generate cash in order to affording getting the right rookie that he missed? He's named Martin as the one. He has considered Foley due to the break even, but he's worried about job security. I'll answer the first part of the question, then I'm keen on your player specific one. And the big part is, yes, you need to do something to get Martin. So absolutely, that's critical trade number one. Now let's talk about McInerney. Was there enough for you to jump off? And then the player he mentioned there, Foley, is that an option for him?
Well, yeah, it's about working through why you actually picked Justin McInerney in the first place. And look, I dare say that it might have been off the back of that preseason performance where I think he did ton up, didn't he, MJ?
Yeah, he played very nice on the outside. And that game was a very skinny game. Like Whitfield was poor. All the outside players for both teams were pretty poor last week.
Yeah, they were. But I would still be asking myself, is this a player that I think can go 85, 90 for at least the foreseeable future at that price? Because we've got a James Sicily, a George Hewitt. I think most coaches selected them thinking, okay, if this guy can go 80, 85, that's a pass mark.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about Justin McInerney, who I think he was up about that 580K range. So just ask yourself, did you see enough in that round one? Is it that anomaly? And is it going to be better off for my team, for cash generation, for points on field, the works, to actually go down to maybe you do a Luke Foley, you get up to Nick Martin? Is that cash generated? And is this on-field score going to be comparable to what you're thinking it may be? If that ends up being a better option than Justin McInerney, then just go for it. You're never going to, there's no point looking back at these types of things, and you always got to end up backing your gut. It just comes down to that. And look, I couldn't tell you if Justin McInerney is going to average 90. There's a good chance that he could. You know, he did it in the final 5 games of 2021, didn't he? Coming home. Maybe Jake Lloyd not being there actually affected his score negatively.
Yeah, and those are those variables that we've all got to put into pieces. And again, if the only way for him to get Martin is McInerney, well, then, okay, now we're talking about different strategies, but there might be other avenues. There may be, just picking a mid-price, so that it may have been a Will Brodie. If Fife is back this week, there might be some cause for concern there. So just like, Rids and Louis talked about throughout this episode, play around with all the different structures and strategies and players and ways to get there, because I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Look past next week as well.
Correct.
Is Justin McInerney going to be someone you do want to offload in round 3 or 4 if he doesn't perform? We might not be able to. We saw with the health and safety protocols for Chera, which came out today, all of a sudden you've got a trade that all week you weren't planning to do. And now all of a sudden, oh no, okay, I've got to look at how I can use this. So just make sure that you've got your priorities straight. Plan your next 2-3 weeks out. Where do you want to be? Is that cash generation going to be more important to you than keeping a Justin McInerney?
Yeah, I think that's good. Sorry, go Rids.
And MJ, I'm going to just jump in because this is really important as well. Look at your bench.
Yes.
Is there someone there that you can trust to fill in for a week? Like with an Adam Chera, okay, you may actually have a midfield bench that could actually go on to the field and, get a 40, 50, whatever, Connor McDonald type. Whereas with a McInerney, is there a bench cover for someone like that as well? Because often that's half the battle with this is going, well, where should I take the risk and where shouldn't I take the risk is often dependent on what's available at that point in time as well.
It's not as risky as you think either. As we saw how thin the defensive line was to start the year, most coaches are rocking a Patrick McCartan at D7, D6.
Yeah.
So you're really just matching the rest of the competition, and you're getting off a guy who maybe you're not so keen on. I'm not sure how unique Justin McInerney is. I think he did get up there.
He was, I think it was around the 20%-ish in AFL fantasy. It's certainly plummeted a little bit more over the past few days, but to your point, it may still need to hold with 1 or 2 more health and safety protocols.
But I tell you what, though, MJ, with McInerney, is a 45 as bad for a McInerney at that price tag, or a 51 for Crisp at his higher price tag? And I mean, this is where if you've got
it's
a
relative
D6 and you're comparing them to a Malera.
Yeah, it's relative, isn't it, to the
many
price?
Points, did you? Like Malera ended up with 50 odd. Like you've only lost 7 points, and you might have been able to in the midfield start a Chera or a Crisp or someone at a lower price. You might have decided I'm not going to go Took, I'm going to go Neil.
Yeah,
and suddenly you're already 20 points clear in that space. So it's not a 1-to-1 matchup as well.
No, it's the combination.
But people get so focused on that one guy that they just can't remove that focus at all.
Yeah, it becomes the stumbling block to enjoyment. And then that's a
And-
different reason for trading then.
And I know that you've probably heard me say this and whinge and carry on like an idiot about it. But I mean, how many times have we seen a guy come out in a quarter and score 50 and then only scores 90 for the match? Just because they've done it in a quarter doesn't mean they're going to do it every quarter. Same thing with round one. Just because they've come out and scored 43 this week doesn't mean they're going to score 43 next week. So just keep an open mind, okay?
Yeah, I think that's some really, really good advice. Rids, question for you here from, who is he? Now he's gone. Stephen Summers has a question. What was your thoughts on the game of Sheldrick from Sydney? And is he a cow we should be keeping an eye on?
No. Move on. Next. No, so
I don't think
really,
he even gets named this week, to be
Well,
fair.
comments from Horse Longmire sounded like he's going to bide his time in the VFL. For
Yeah, it felt like here's a taste. Now get back.
Yeah,
And the thing
and we
was,
saw that from
MJ,
Mitch Owens as well, I think.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
I felt that a few games in the lower division would actually develop him a lot more than being thrown into the AFL. And I'm pretty sure that the messaging out of Sydney is that's the case.
Yeah, I thought it was health and safety protocols with Warner and Lloyd missing were probably the only reason he got the opportunity more than anything else. So, yeah, probably not. Louis, AFL fantasy question. Chris wants to know, is there any decent options between 300 and 450K in that price range? Or should he be looking down right towards the Skinner and Sin types who are likely to debut? Again, not named at time of recording.
Yeah, I've had a look at that price tag a little bit, MJ, and I just can't help but feel like it's a bit of no man's land there.
Yeah.
So unless you're looking at a Luke Foley, who, look, I'm not going to convince a coach not to pick because he's got that 11 break even. So there is upside
There's
there
money
in
there.
terms of where he's priced at and what cash generation he's actually going to develop. But outside of that, there's not a lot of guys that are screaming value, and there's not a lot of guys that have that lower break even. So I'd be more inclined to jump down, maybe have a look at a Josh Shin or something like that.
Yeah.
You've got Jackson Mead. He should have a little bit of added job security with, I think Rosie's picked up an injury. So, and Dersman might not be any guarantee to play either. So
Yeah.
I'd be more inclined to go down and use that cash elsewhere because you've got 200K doing that.
Yeah.
Instead of actually getting onto this guy who's in that no man's land territory of 350 to 450K. You're basically going to be riding that until you can get up to someone, or you're just going to go down anyway.
Yeah, and chances are
unless you're
Foley's a
bullish.
1 week play. Anyway,
Exactly.
you need multiple weeks to really make it worthwhile.
Well, we're going to see Witherden, Duggan return, let alone all the other blokes.
Potentially
at West Coast.
Shuey,
There's
Kelly.
about 26 blokes on that injury list. They're all
Yeah,
going to
I want
come back
nothing to
into
do
that
with West
side.
Coast at the moment. There is so many unknown variables about that team.
That and throw COVID into the mix too, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be affected as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's good. I think pretty much every other Patreon question we've worked our way through this strategy part of the podcast. So John, Ian, other John, Matt, Craig, AJS, and Sam, all brilliant questions, but we were able to integrate them for you all the way in to this podcast. Julie as well, a couple of others in there. So thank you for that. Hey, lads, as always, appreciate your work on this midweek trade and strategy podcast. Rids, as always, a pleasure, mate.
So, mate, just a quick one on Luke Foley. Okay, I
Yes,
did
please.
a little bit of play around with Luke Foley through the week in AFL fantasy. Now, there was a couple of things that I think I got confused with, and I sort of did a little bit of work on this. Luke Foley, I feel, is a draft proposition for a keeper league. Because of the Hearn factor retiring, Dugan being moved into the midfield. And sometimes we get a little bit conflicted and we forget who's missing and who's not missing and potential scores. So Luke Foley last year, when he came into the team, he had a good couple of rounds there where he scored 67 and 90 against Carlton and Richmond. But then he sort of went back down to that 45, 50 point bracket, okay, when there was a few more resources in that back line. So the problem we got with Luke Foley is we've actually got some of those guys like an Ainsworth and McCartan at much lower points, like price tags, that can actually really, they could be a 60 average type guy, and they've got reasonably decent job security. Whereas I don't think Foley's shown enough to be that person, and I don't think the job security's there either. So I don't know whether that helps whoever that was that asked that question before, but that's where I sort of fell when I did a bit of work around Luke Foley earlier in the week.
It speaks to that volatility too, Rids. So
it does.
Jack Steele scored about an 80 in AFL fantasy. He's not an 80 guy. He's a 110 plus guy. Luke Foley on the other end of the spectrum goes 100. Well, history suggests he's more of a 50 to 60 guy. So things will correct themselves throughout the season. So that big shiny 100 and the break even, which is tempting, and I'm not going to convince any coach not to jump on it because I may be well off, and there's no doubt he's probably going to make 50, 60, 70.
Yeah, he'll make money for you, no question.
If he continues to get a game, but it does come down to that round one volatility with the lack of data and just being careful not to jump at shadows and being careful not to be enamored with a single score from a single player.
No, it's good. Hey, Louis, as always, mate, an absolute pleasure from you, mate. Some ripping advice from you as well on this episode, buddy.
Thanks, mate. Bring on round two when I think the game's going to open up just a little bit more. There's going to be a few more options and there's going to be a lot more strategy to talk. So round one can be quite constricting in what you can do and where you can actually pivot because outside of those rookies, everything that you've done the whole preseason has come into one with that round one starting side. So there's not a lot of reason to divert from that unless you have made a big mistake.
Yeah, I love the advice you lads have given. We cannot wait to get into round two. Lots to dissect from that. Our Patreons, they've got some exclusive content right throughout this week. You can check that out. If you're not a Patreon, you can go and grab that. One of those things is a round review episode that drops on a Monday with me, as well as a bunch of other stuff. All the links, if you loved what you got from the coaches panel this year, throughout the preseason and into the season proper, if you want to get that, coachespanel.tv has all the links. While you're there, the break evens are up, articles dropping every couple of days, and the Ultimate Footy waiver wires kick off in the next couple of weeks from Jordox, as well as a bunch of other stuff that we're always dropping at coachespanel.tv. Good luck in round two. I hope your captain kills it. I hope you win rookie roulette, and we can't wait to chat to you again next week as we enter into a very important round three.